Well, good afternoon. This is Joe's Adventures. I've had a lot of questions, both submitted in an email and on YouTube, and actually some when I run into some people in person in the supermarkets. How did I get started? Various questions. So I'm going to take a few of those questions and try and respond to them right now. First one, well, how did I get started hiking? Well, that goes back to when I was a boy. I guess I had that wanderlust in me, and I was always the one that wanted to go out in the woods, go out on the trails, see what was there, the experience, the adventure. Still want to do it. So that's kind of why I like hiking. The next question was, what kind of gear do you use? Well, it's first of all, it's got to have a good pair of hiking boots. Without those, you're going to have some real sore feet, blisters. It may cause you to quit prematurely. So go into it with a good pair of hiking boots. I use the Georgia Giant from the Georgia Boot Company, and they're great. Great support, and they're good on the trail. Some of the trails can be a little rugged, and if they're rugged with roots and rocks, etc., you want something solid on your feet. Next question, what do I bring with me? Obviously, I'm going to carry a good supply of liquids, water. Typically, I'll just bring water. Sometimes I'll bring Gatorade, sometimes I'll might bring iced tea. I don't like the sweet things. I try to stick with water primarily. And you want to have an adequate supply. If you're going to go out on a hike, and especially in warm weather, you're going to need sufficient water, usually at least a couple of liters with you. Next question, do I bring any first aid equipment with me? Well, actually, some minimal first aid, yes. I typically always carry some Band-Aids, just in case you get those blisters, which you don't want. And I always carry not exactly a Swiss Army knife, but my version of a pocket knife with me. You never know if you need to use it, and not something you want to bring through airport security, obviously. But when you're out hiking on the trails, I believe it's essential. Another question was, how do I go about choosing the trails? Well, a lot goes into that. First of all, it depends on how much time I have. Part of that is, the distance to travel to the area. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we're blessed. We have all sorts of hiking trails, miles and miles, hundreds of miles of them. And, typically I'll try and find some new trails each time, but that always isn't possible. So I have a few favorite spots, and I'm at one of those favorite spots right now where just in 2 or 3 miles I can be where I want to be to do a little videography and get in a little exercise at the same time. One thing I would urge you to consider before you go out hiking, know the area. And if you're going to an area you've never been to before, don't go by yourself. And if you must go by yourself, let someone know where you're going, and have a good cell phone with you. Have some sort of guidance equipment with you, whether you have maps or some sort of GPS device. Actually, when I'm a lot of time, often, I'm on trails I've been on numerous times, and typically I'm very familiar with them. Well, if that's the case, then you're in pretty good shape. But if I go out on trails, which was the case a couple of weeks ago when I went with a group from the Sierra Club, we were at a place where many of us had never been before, and really only our leader had been there. So it was rather a moderately strenuous hike, and there were some hazards. So a word of caution, pay attention to what you're doing. Don't take all those pictures unless you're sure where your footing is. And I always tell people I won't do any video work if it's too steep or a precipice or something like that. Another question is, how do you manage with temperatures, cold and warm? Well, for me personally, I prefer hiking in cooler temperatures. When you're out there hiking, one tends to build up a lot of body heat, and you don't need 80 degrees to make you warm. I've hiked in the 30s, and you find out you need to dress in layers. So layer the clothing so you can take it off or put it on as is necessary. Once you slow down or you stop and pause, you're going to cool down some, and you might want to add a layer back. And once the temperature gets up around 55, 60, my goodness, that's warm. That's warm for hiking. And if it's in the 80s or thereabouts, I typically will not hike that afternoon. So the mornings are ideal, at least for me. Well, those are just some of the questions that have been coming in to me. Joe's Adventures on YouTube. You can send them to Joe at corvalistidbits.com, and I will get your question. Love to have you subscribe to the channel. Corvallis Tidbits is a free website, all sorts of news and information about recreational activities. Love to have you go there and take a look at it. And visit my YouTube channel. It's also free, and I think you might find some interesting videos on there. So until next time, this is Joe from Joe's Adventures. Have a wonderful trip.